panel of the International Forum Crimea is Ukraine, and the first panel is dedicated to very important topic, reintegration of Crimea, the dialogue in conditions of annexation. Some of our guests will be joining us in course of this event, but I would like to introduce the participants of the first panel. Sergiy Kostynskyi, in the past member of the National Council of Television and Radio Broadcasting; Pavlo Kazarin, journalist, TV host; Vitaliy Portnykov, journalist, publicist, observer of the Radio Liberty; and Yevhen Magda, political expert and journalist. So we have 2 hours. I asked the guys what we'll be talking about for 2 hours. They said the main thing is to start. Sergiy, during last year, was working on information policy on Crimea. Could you tell, Sergiy, what did you manage to do last year? Where should we be moving to in the nearest future? First of all, I would like to thank all the journalists and the experts who agreed to participate in the forum. You know what is the most important? After I left Crimea, the topic of Crimea was the problem of Crimeans, of the IDPs. That today is the case, but the level is different. And we saw the wall, and we understood that we do not know how to overcome it, but we at least had some inspiration to do so. What was last year? Last year I was a volunteer, and we, Crimean IDPs, public organizations, we decided that the anniversary, everyone forgot about this date when a year ago Crimea was annexed. We have it legally, but actually it is annexed. And such forum a year ago, Crimea's Ukraine, where Vitaliy Portnykov participated, Mustafa Dzhemilev, Andriy Senchenko, Alexander Piantkovsky, Rifat Chubarov, and others. It was organized by some IDPs. That was a public initiative, and I'm grateful that the media supported us then. And 3 days before that, the campaign Crimea's Ukraine was presented. Some people were supporting it, some were laughing at it, but we believed it's important because that wasn't mentioned either in media. The bloggers wouldn't write about that, but I believe that now we changed the situation, the perception. We are the forum, the organization of this has grown up, and that means that the level of the understanding of the problem went up to a different level. The state, the return of Crimea, information deoccupation of Crimea is the main issue for the state of Ukraine. And I would like to state today that these 2 years of information work, first as volunteers, last year I was the advisor to the Minister on Information Policy. All that produced results, but we wouldn't have any results if we didn't unite our efforts. What are the results? What has changed in the minds of Ukrainians and the people in Crimea who are annexed? I just see what people think about our slogan, Crimea is Ukraine. Now people are surprised. Why are you just stating the fact? Previously, for us, it was a vacuum. Many people were saying, why do we need to return the Crimea? Why do we need it? But now the election map has changed. The parliament is different. And they say, why do we need these territories? Because they were pulling us towards Russia. Now the attitude to Crimea has changed. I don't hear people now saying that the Crimea shouldn't be part of Ukraine. Ukrainian society is willing to return Crimea, and without the efforts of all Crimean IDPs, it would be impossible. What about the people in Crimea who are there? Do they feel the support of Ukraine? This is a very complicated question. The main thing for the person which is in occupation, basically all my family is on the occupied territory. For them it is very important. They're now watching this online. It is important for them that the topic of Crimea is there. They understand, while on the big land they're talking about Crimea, even if they're just talking about that. There are certain things happening as well, but while we are talking about Crimea, they understand that they do have hope, and they will be waiting for the time when they live in Crimea, which is under the jurisdiction of the state of Ukraine. My question is to Pavlo. We discussed in the beginning of the discussion that probably the people in Crimea are much more concerned with that. We live within our information environment. Has the attitude of the society changed? My name is Vitaliy Kazarin. Thank you for the question. In fact, one of the major tasks of the journalism is to explain the country to the country. For 24 years, we were not covering some dark spots. We were tired of this phrase, Kiev doesn't hear Donbass, and let us look now. Did we understand, especially people in Kiev, what was the reality of life in Crimea for the last 23 years? It is just like they were saying, we were saying that Kiev did not understand the life in Crimea, and Kiev does not understand the reality of life in Transcarpathia. When something is happening there, when people are shooting in Mukachevo, we're looking at the news and we say, do they have the problem of smuggling in Transcarpathia? It is there for the last 25 hours, and when our colleague investigates illegal production of some in Polessia, well, basically this not desire to look into the Ukrainian, when we were in Kiev, when we came to Kiev, we saw that there are many stereotypes, the myths about what Crimea lives with, and we prepared this brochure, and everyone could get it, and that's the anthology of the modern Crimean history. Could you please tell about the major ones? How did you manage to disseminate these myths? There are many authors who wrote this brochure. When we analyzed what we need to say when they discuss the peninsula, we realized that the Crimea should be explained. Many say that if the brochure is in Russian, then first of all that is for Russian audience. No, this is first of all for Ukrainian audience. We will publish it in Ukrainian and in English as well. And that is the attempt to explain everything. Because when you come to Kiev, they tell you, well, Crimea is the most pro-Russian region. We say that it's not pro-Russian but pro-Soviet. Then it's not the whole of Crimea is like that. Probably you do not want to notice the backside of the moon because you did not look there. Then you hear different stories, and that Crimea all its life lived for the because of tourism, and you have to explain why it is not so. It is important. Any dialogue is the space of common sense. Otherwise, we can speak you can say some words, but if sentences mean different things, then you will not be able to agree on something. And this brochure is an attempt to discuss the terms which we will use when we are discussing Crimea. The main myth is that all pro-Ukrainian Crimean people have left the peninsula, but this is wrong. In fact, the structure of Crimean society is very different. There are 35-40% of pro-Soviet citizens, about 20 minimum percent are pro-Ukrainian population who are always for Kiev, irrespective of whether Ukraine lives well or bad, and about 30-40% are people for whom it does not matter. The main priority for them is to have no war, to have stability. When Yanukovych in 2010 was putting these billboards, because I'm stable, he was putting them for them. And these people in February 2014 receiving the information from the hands of Dmitry Kiselyov, they got scared of Kiev and they just joined the pro-Russian citizens. If modern Russia scares them more than 2 years ago, they were scared by the events in the center of Ukrainian capital, they will join these 20% of Ukrainian citizens. But the main thing is, we shouldn't forget that in Crimea there are pro-Ukrainian citizens. Yes, they are in the situation of internal immigration, but in 2013 in Ukraine we were not hearing or listening to those people. We could not see, could not hear the people who later became the volunteers. In 2013, the sociologists were saying that 64% of the citizens of Ukraine are not ready to go to the actions of protest. So remember, there are people in Ukraine who look at us, who look beyond the Perikop. Remember that every time you look at the map. We believe not just to look to remember them, we need to establish the dialogue. What could be the ways of finding the dialogue with different groups of Crimean people? First of all, for those pro-Ukrainian Crimeans, it is important for them to know that we remember them, that the topic of Crimea is not like a Crimean ghetto. There is one platform dedicated to Crimea, and that's it. That's it. No one is interested in that. On the one hand, that is the problem of the social demand, and the other one is the problem of Ukrainian state. I'm sorry, Sergiy, but I can speak more than my colleague can. Ukrainian state is weak, and very often they work when they're pushed. If there is some media push, then the state reacts till people get near administration of the president demanding that Ukrainian foreign ministry gives some reaction to the searches which were held in houses of Crimean Tatars, then no one would react to that. It's like a story about Pavlov's dog. You have to develop this reflex. We would like the state to react without any signal from civil society. Every time, very often I hear the question from my friends who did not understand what Crimea was, but they say, why do we need to return Crimea? Every time I tell them, just understand what's happening in Donbass, it is the second part of Crimean play. Unless there were annexation of Crimea, then we wouldn't have to read the list of those soldiers who are killed in Donbass. So the logic is very simple. The war will end up only when the Crimea is back. Vitaliy, the question is to you. Pavel was saying that there are some information ghettos. How do we make it more interesting for Ukrainian viewer, reader, has it become more interesting for Ukrainian reader or viewer? I believe for the Crimean topic to be discussed by Ukrainian citizens, we ourselves have to uh, uh, disseminate all the myths which exist there. We were talking about the myths about the reality in Crimea, but in fact, a big part of mythology is in our attitude to the problem. The politicians are telling how they will get Crimea back in a year and a half. The civil society activists say that if the siege of Crimea is organized, it will speed up the return. Others say if you implement the reform, the Crimea would want to become part of Ukraine. And we live in these realities, and because all these realities are a science fiction, then the audience doesn't understand it. Or they perceive it like they perceive any type of a slogan. We do not really understand what happened there. And now, when Pavel united Crimea and Donbass, that's another illustration of that, because Crimea has nothing to do with Donbass from the legal point of view. We need to understand that we witnessed absolutely unprecedented event in the history of humankind, of mankind, at least of mankind after the first civil world war. Because talking about all the conflicts existing in the post-Soviet space, we deal with so-called self-proclaimed republics, and because these self-proclaimed republics did not declare that they joined some other state, and any other state agreed to take them, because of that there is a big space for maneuver. That is why the meetings of the presidents can take place about Karabakh or about what's happening in Donbass, and the Serbs and Kosovo, Serbia and Kosovo set up at negotiations, and they discussed the issue about the citizens of Kosovo. So there is the possibility to renew the dialogue between Abkhazia, Southern Ossetia and Georgia. This dialogue was stopped in times of rule of Mikhail Saakashvili, but we need to remember that people will forget about the rule of Putin, Medvedev in Russia, and Saakashvili in Georgia. Then there might be the time when they will be united again. But what happened to Crimea? Crimea was actually, and that makes impossible any menu. It was joined to Russian Federation. We can say that that does not correspond to international law, but from the point of view of Russian law, Crimea and Sevastopol are part of Russian Federation. This is just the same type of Russian territory as Ufa, Petersburg, and so on. And the question is, if someone wants to return these territories, what will Russia do? In history, there is only one example of resolving that problem, and it doesn't suit us. That's annexation by Indonesia of Portugal colony, Eastern Timor, and I was working on that issue, I was analyzing it, and I remember the strategy expressed by the second president of Eastern Timor. He had a clear idea to return Eastern Timor. For that, you can do that only when in Indonesia there are problems related to its own disintegration, and then The refusal from Eastern Timor will be payment for preservation the territorial integrity of Indonesia, and that is what really happened. But the Front of Liberation of Eastern Timor had stronger position than we had, because they could organize the referendum where the citizens were expressing whether they are for or against, and they could win the referendum. Before that, they organized a very serious campaign at the peninsula. When this part of Timor was occupied by Indonesia, the pro-Indonesian moods were not strong. The guerrillas of Eastern Timor were forcing the authorities to organize systemic repressions. The people were tortured, arrested, killed, and the population of Eastern Timor was living in horror. They were trying to get rid of that because they understood that the situation will not improve their life. They wanted this civil conflict which existed on the territory of Western Timor, they wanted it to finish. And also there were many who supported independence. Also people were ready to pay this price for independence. When Indonesian army learned about results of referendum, dozens of thousands of people were killed, dozens of thousands became refugees. The citizens of Eastern Timor were ready to pay for the independence. That's not about us, not about Crimea. Are you showing that? What about Crimean Tatars? We're talking about illusions. Crimean Tatars are only 15% of the autonomy. If the situation develops like that, their number will reduce. But they suffer from repression. They are pro-Ukrainian and they are ready to fight. But the repressions of Russian side are related to the fact that they want to squeeze them out of the territory. But the Eastern Timor did not want to join any other state. They wanted to become an independent state, and Indonesia agreed to that, because even after Eastern Timor was proclaimed independent, Indonesia remained integral, and the authorities realized that the influence of Indonesia will be there. Now, about Crimea, I would like to remind that Indonesia is not a nuclear state. It does not have to, it cannot defend its territory with the assistance of even tactical nuclear weapons. Russia can. So in principle, if we think about the idea of Russian law, it is impossible to return Crimea. We need to tell that, but we cannot agree to that as the state. Then what could be the way out of the situation? We need to openly, honestly say that. I told you about this conversation with the future president of Eastern Timor. I will tell you another story, one with the future head of Lithuania. It was the first, we were in the Kremlin and he was telling me about the strategy of declaring independence of Lithuania. And he was telling me about things which had nothing, which didn't mean anything. He said that Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union, that it is not according to international law, that the Soviet Union, despite the Yalta Conference, changed the borders of Europe, that most democracies of the world do not recognize that, and if the Parliament of Lithuanian Republic approves the decision about restoring independence in Moscow, they have to agree with that, and they implemented it. And I told him, Professor, all your evidence from the point of view of international law have nothing to, don't have any force. There is a Helsinki Act, and the Soviet leadership does not care about your parliament and about the international law. You can approve even 50 declarations. And I said that I see only one way when Lithuania can become an independent state. That's disintegration of the Soviet Union. If you are able to disintegrate the Soviet Union for the sake of independence of Lithuania, you will be free. If not, then Lithuania will always be part of the Soviet Union. He said, if we will have to destroy the Soviet Union because we want independence, we will destroy it. That was the only recipe. The only recipe for return of Crimea is territorial disintegration of Russian Federation. All other recipes are just consumption of Ukrainian budget. This will not lead to any result. We need to work not in Simferopol, in Sevastopol, in Yalta, but in Moscow. What about information, even informationally? Our panel is dedicated to information policy. We need to talk about the problems of the people of nationalities of Russian Federation. We need to talk about the problems of Russian Federation. We need to say that Russian Federation can become the normal civilized state when they agree to international law. We need to prove that many decisions of Russian leadership are not constitutional.
Will force the leadership of Russia to compromise with those territories that comprise Russia. So we should work on this. And one more important aspect I wanted to mention. When we are speaking about population of Crimea and how it will view the opportunity to return to Ukraine, we should remember the example of Croatia and its territorial integrity. Croatia restored its territorial integrity in the course of the bright military operations that could happen only because Serbia was too weak. And Serbia didn't disintegrate but couldn't influence the adjacent territories. But this was accompanied by a massive flee of pro-Serbian population, civilians, mainly civilians. And that didn't have any relation to those events that happened before this in the territory of these pseudo-autonomies in Croatia. At the same time, and the fleeing of Croatia population from Bosnia and Herzegovina, as an opposition to the fleeing of population from Croatia. So this was two-way process. Croatian population, Croatia, fully accepted this. They supported this. And if you conduct a poll, whether Ukrainians agree to return Crimea, if people will flee from Crimea, I don't think that you will get positive result. What do you mean by saying positive? That the population of Ukraine will support the decision that that population that is still in Crimea will be there. And what is your opinion as a journalist? So our population is not ready for the radical actions. And I just tell you about the realia of our life. And in Crimea, there are a lot of pro-Russian or pro-Soviet people, because you know that Russia is some sort of Soviet Union, and it's difficult to distinguish between Russian and Soviet views. And what about the people who are still living in the Soviet? No, they are living in the Russian Federation. They return to Russia, and they feel comfortable in their information space. And we can't change their reality without changing the country in which they live, because this country, it influences them in the information sphere by doing nothing. They just see the reality in which they lived all their life, and they were much more comfortable. And they returned to it. And yesterday there was a 16th anniversary of Khrushchev's speech about the cult of personality. On the 25th of February in 1965, he delivered the speech, and we just woke up, and the main aim was to return to the state before this speech, when they didn't know anything, and Russian society returned to this. And if you see the publications in Russia today, you see that they felt comfortable living in the world before the speech. And this population in Crimea, these are colonists who came there after deportation of indigenous people, and they were resettled in other people's houses. And my grandmother, she went to evacuation from Kiev. She was proposed to go to Angels because there were empty houses, and she said that these were the houses of Germans in Powolzhia, and she didn't want to go to these houses because they were not her, they were of other people, and some children, they could die then, and some people just go to and live in other people's flats. And how can you address them if acceptable for them, for their families, just to live in other people's houses? I don't know, but maybe Evgeny will give us an answer to this question. This is our next speaker. I think that today it's very difficult for Ukraine to compete in information sphere. If you're speaking about the events of today in Crimea, Russia believes that Crimea is their territory, and that Crimea, they can't leave Russia because the only way is the disintegration of Russia. So if we stay and if we just start to wait that these things really happen, we will wait for too long. And information component on returning Crimea is the creation of an image of the future of the Crimea, because it's difficult to compete with today. And the population won't change, and those pro-Russian or pro-Soviet views, maybe even pro-Soviet, and historically it happens, so they won't change in one season. And maybe there should be too many of these failed vacation seasons in order that people understand. You shouldn't forget that the strategy of Russian power, that this is not a vacation destination, but it is a military base there. But we shouldn't believe that all the society in Crimea is politicized. And in the world, there are not many countries where this state goes on for a long time. Of course, there are some people who drive the society ahead. And we should build the image as you wanted in the sphere that some like such oblasts as Odessa Oblast and Nikolaev Oblast, and they should create and they should develop holiday destinations, and also to attract foreign investments, and large companies should go there, foreign companies I mean, and then there should be some land allocated, the issues of corruption should be solved, and effective logistics should be created for this. And also there should be some positive changes in Ukraine, and they should be closer to Crimea. And the Crimeans will see these changes, even against their own will. Just at the level of grapevine gossips, they should see this and hear this. So you believe that a prosperous Ukraine will be able to return Crimea. I believe that building of a successful Ukraine should be done not from Kiev to Crimea, but maybe from Kherson to the direction of Kiev. Because objectively, it's difficult for Ukraine to fight against Russian propaganda and to show, and you see that we don't have a lot of arguments what we can propose to Crimeans in order to return them. And Russian position is understandable. They got this peninsula with all the population that agreed to be the citizens of Russian Federation, and they created some system of social security as they think they should, and they can provide some private vacation facilities, but they also bring some people to state facilities for recreational activities. And you know that we should speak not only about political mottos, and not only with Crimean Tatars respecting their position, but with all Ukrainians who have opportunities to try to return the Crimea, and who are the recipients of the Crimean topic, and the strategy, to whom should it be directed toward? So I believe that mainly these should be maybe the youth. And Ukraine should use, as they call it, the instruments of maybe through NGOs, through international organizations, and we have positive examples that UNESCO didn't approve that and they support the resolution that they do not support that Crimea is Russian. So we should direct our efforts in order to grow the agents of changes in Crimea among youth, and these should be also media instruments that are directed to the youth. Interactive means that create the interest to Ukraine, to the prospects of Crimea in Ukraine, and that creates opportunity to come to Ukraine to get education here and to start career here. And one more aspect, Ukraine should create an active model of Crimea and the model of its future. And there maybe should be some bodies of governmental bodies of Crimea in exile that model how the Crimea will develop after it returns to Ukraine. And that would be a pleasant surprise, and we would spend a lot of time in order to establish proper relationship and activities. And about that it is important not only to return the territory, but the people. This topic circulated in the media, and I would like to give the floor to our next speaker. This is a Crimean historian who left Crimea the year after the previous year, and now he works in the Academy of Sciences, and now we Vitaliy Portnykov told us about some historic events, and now I would like to ask you, if we take into account the peculiarities of those people who live in Crimea, what should be the strategy in reintegration of the territory? I would like to start with the negation of some aspects of speech. His speech was really ambitious, and it's very difficult to say something against it. But in my personal opinion, Vitaliy spoke in general, and these generalizations shouldn't be made now, that the people were resettled, and this is the common for all Russian people. I don't agree with this. About national and state ideology, I didn't say this. Okay, we'll look in the records. So if we are speaking that Russia today has the advantage in the influence on the population of Crimea, this is correct. And also I agree that there should be some changes in Russia, because otherwise the task is utopic. And if we are speaking about history, the collapse of the Soviet Union, but in the 1950s and 1960s, the collapse of the Soviet Union looked like a utopia, but there was an information campaign of America and Great Britain and Russia. They transmitted radio broadcast, and also there was an article that we shouldn't overestimate the force of Putin's army, because this is an illusion. And we believe today that Russia is strong, and they try to collect Russian lands. But it could happen that Russia won't exist tomorrow. And we should follow with our information campaign why we should do this. And also the second thesis is why we will be able to do this. We should understand that when we speak about that the Crimea, Russians are the biggest group in Crimea, and there are pro-Russian views there, we understand the reasons why. And in 20 years of independence of Ukraine and Crimea, there was a change that, due to this change, the Crimea was the part of Ukraine. And also,
I can tell you that pro-Russian electorate is not more than 40% of the population. Another 20% are pro-Ukrainian voters who do not need to be convinced in anything. Pavlo Kazarin was saying that we do not hear them because this is how information space is designed in Russia. They are silent, but they are there. And there are 40% who have always been not for Kiev, not for Moscow, but for cheap food and peace. And when the local regional authorities entered into synergy with Russian propaganda, when they were talking about Crimea being the Russian land and Banderovцы who want war, then they joined those 40% of pro-Russians. But after the return of Crimea, these 40% will be back again. They will either join pro-Russia, pro-Ukrainian majority, or they will again become a swamp, but situative pro-Russian majority in Crimea will not last. I believe that even without any radical measures, we will be able to keep Crimea as part of Ukraine after its return. And then we're here on the 26th of February, the day when the people in Crimea proved that internal separatism is not enough to detach Crimea from Ukraine. Russia had to start armed aggression to help separatists. Separatists themselves did not have enough force. And that is why I become optimistic. We cannot do all we want to, but we need to understand that this is not just the waste of resources. Our objective is achievable. Pavel wanted to say something. I believe an important thing is The topic of today's discussion is information policy on Crimea. And this topic has three dimensions. First is information work with the peninsula, with those pro-Ukrainian people who are there, with those potential 40% that Sergiy told about, who understand. Many people who in February and March were looking at Moscow with optimism. They wanted to get to a wonderful world, and where there is a feeling of disaster.
Судьба Крыма и
Despite the fact that the destiny of Crimea depends not on people in Crimea, even if all 100% of people in Crimea want to live in Ukraine, we understand that that will not influence the Kremlin, but still we need to work with these people because they are our citizens, because we cannot leave anyone without saying that we remember them. Information work is one of the three components. It is to be conducted on the peninsula. It is important for Crimea not to be discussed only in media ghetto. The second one, information work on Crimea should be conducted in relation to the whole of Ukraine. When we talk about the peninsula, when we include it into the agenda, it is very important. When I was saying that Crimea and Donbass are related, what I meant is the whole situation of the last 2 years is like this Matryoshka doll. To hide Crimea, Donbass started. To hide Donbass, Russian army went to Syria. You take off the upper part and you see what's inside. And the inside is like a fairy tale. The second topic should be the topic of the peninsula should be explained to Ukrainians who live on the mainland. Then there will be a public request for any politician, and the politician will at least be talking about that. And the third, the most important component, and that is what Vitaliy was talking about, is work with international institutions, with the organizations that work in the field of international law. The human consciousness is of the inertia type. The first you have a bright impression, but then you have to remind about historic similar situations. You can work with international society explaining that the story about Crimea is the same as the story of Sudetsky region of Czechoslovakia. And the same time in some Berlin Zeitung, they were talking about Czechoslovak junta who is threatening the Sudetsky Germans, and they were writing that Germans are very poor because Czechs do not allow them to develop the industry. And then Ribbentrop, Chamberlain go there, the München agreement is signed about this split of Czechoslovakia. After that, Chamberlain comes to London and says that I brought peace to our generation. And the Churchill said what he said, and in a year, the Second World War started. I believe that this is to be explained to European colleagues, the media, historic content. Sergiy was the advisor to the Minister of Information Policy last year. this argument of historic parallels, does it somehow influence international audience that Putin is the future Hitler, that today is Crimea and tomorrow is the World War? Always say about Crimea, it all works because the voice about the Crimea is heard, and we need to use all the topics, all the even historic parallels, because that works. And people can hear that. But I would like to apologize. I am a civil servant, and I speak Ukrainian at work, and I am at work now, but I will switch to Russian. In Russian, I'm more emotional. Would like to share the following. For 2 years, I was a volunteer as an expert of Crimean Institute of Strategic Studies. Then Crimean journalists delegated me to become the advisor to the Minister on Information Policy on Crimea, and now Emeni Japar is there. I have become the civil servant, and I would like to share my impressions. When I was a volunteer, when you become a civil servant, what impressed me most? I have the impression that the return of Crimea is the problem of the state. Everyone demands demands from the state get Crimea back, and the people in Crimea, because we have to get our homes back. And the story about Crimea, whether there are pro-Ukrainian citizens or not, that is for us the story of Save Private Ryan. Even if there is only one citizen with the flag of Ukraine, we need to try and rescue him and save him. But we have the whole nation there. We have Ukrainians. We have representatives of all nationalities. According to the statistics, there are 125 nationalities, ethnic groups. They are waiting. They either go to the mainland or they are in the situation of internal immigration, and they're waiting. And for the sake of them, we need to continue that. When we come there, when we go there, there will be more pro-Ukrainians. 23rd of February, 26th of February, 20,000 people every time would go to the square. There were separatists against us. We did not allow the parliament to pass the decision on separation of Crimea from Ukraine. In the streets, the separatists lost. We did not. We just lacked the support of the state. When on the 27th, the administrative building was seized, we said basically it's like 1993, the tanks will be shooting at the parliament. But there were no tanks, no one. We were there, we were just common guys. We showed that Crimea is Ukrainian. As to our fight for Crimea, I started from saying that that's not just the problem of Ukrainian state, the problem of people from Lugansk and Donetsk. It's the problem for the whole of the society. Today, as a civil servant, I want to say the Ukrainian society has not agreed between themselves that we have the war and we are fighting for our territories. My private experience, for example, the Ministry of Information Policy restores the broadcasting in ATO territory. What do they say? You do nothing. There's no broadcasting. We understand that we work on that. The special commission is set up where all the agencies are present, and now tell us where do we have broadcasting. But to receive the analog system signal, they have to turn their antenna from Donetsk to Volnovakha or to Kramatorsk. But we need to explain that. We need to help them to do that. Then the war. We have not agreed that we have the war and we are fighting for Ukraine. When we are saying sorry, but we need to exclude, to disconnect Russian TV channels that violate the Convention on Transborder Broadcasting, and we see the resistance from some of the players of the industry. So they're saying, we're sorry, this is not European way. So are we in war? Are we not in war? Do we have to defend our information space? The quota topic, Vyacheslav Kirilenko mentioned that talked about these quotas to Ukrainian language songs on the radio. He offered 37.5%. That's very difficult, but to register that at least at the minimum level and to define the state policy on that, this is the correct position. We need Ukrainian songs because the language is the form of influence, of soft influence, and Russian language as an instrument of influence. That is what Russia is using. They are creating the cheap content, the Russian content, and our industry is buying that, and they do it because it's easier for us to do that. Our language today is our main instrument of defense of our national interests. And again, we see the resistance. Why do we need Ukrainian language? It should be fighting as equal with Russian, but we in this state of war, and are we protecting our national interests or not? That's the quick question for us. The topic of Crimea will be effective and will be effectively fighting for the territory that was stolen only when the whole society agrees, when we will not have the situation when one political force is fighting against another one. So the society is the society where we will not be able to get the united position on the issue of Crimea at the level of intellectual elite, at the level of managers, when media groups stop appointing to management people who are related to militants in Donbass. And our every meeting starts with we find that some film about NKVD, about the propaganda of communism, about socialist revolution, these films are broadcasted. Vitaliy wants to say something, wants to reply probably. I just want to say that we need to live in the world of real examples. Sudeti is a bad example. I will tell you why. When in 1918 the territory of Austro-Hungarian Republic was empire was divided, Hungary was formed so that they had 100% of Hungarian population. Austria had 100% of Austrian and German population, but Czechoslovakia was formed in such a way that they had 60%, 65% of Czechoslovak population. Have you thought, why are we talking about Czechoslovakia? Because neither Czechs nor Slovaks were the majority there. The majority there were Germans. And I'm reading the biography of the second president of Czechoslovakia, Edvard Beneš, and they say that that was a big victory that was basically initiated the crash of Czechoslovakia. Why did they need it? If they did not have the majority of Germans, the Slovaks wouldn't need the Czechs. It was about creating one common ethnos of two ethnic groups that were different, and the Czechs treated Slovaks like Russians treat Ukrainians, and they basically decided to do what then led to the disaster. And what Beneš did, the President Beneš did in the result, how did they resolve the problem of Sudet? Were they liberated by Russian army? No, President Beneš, when he came back to Prague, they removed all the citizens of Czechoslovakia of German origin, because the decision of Reich on giving them the citizenship of Germany had no legal force. The only thing why these people were removed from the territory of Sudets was their German ethnic origin. If you talk to Czechs and Slovaks today, they will say that that was correct thing to do. So that is, then we need to tell the international community that we are ready to that we are ready to decrease of banish to 90% removal of the people. But I'm not ready. That's why I say let's work in the 21st century, but not in the category of nightmare of the 20th century. The second remark, when we're talking about 40 plus 40 plus 40, I was Ukrainian activist in Moscow, and I could imagine that in Moscow I can organize such round table who speak Ukrainian. About 40% population in Moscow are for United Russia, 40 think about food, then 10% are Tatars, not Crimean, but Tatars, that's the second ethnic minority. There are many different, but Tatars is a big part of the population of Moscow. Then first there were Jewish, then Ukrainians, and now Tatars, but that's the same formula. With the same approaches, you can make Moscow part of Ukraine. Basically, again, let's think about international law and about how Russia interprets international law. If they can refuse from Crimea, then they can refuse from Moscow with such moods of the population. But it's all over Russian like that. 40% are for food, 40% are for United Russia, and 10% do not care. Then about Crimean Tatars, we do not willing it. As Ukraine, we have become the subject of eternal fight of Russian Federation for elimination of Crimean Tatar Crimea. That started in times of Catherine II. In those days, there were 90% of the population of Crimea. Since then, they started working on deportation, then assimilation, and then they, in 1944, they deported the indigenous nation, and restoring life of Crimean Tatars happened only thanks to the disintegration of the Soviet Union, thanks to the fact that Crimea was Ukrainian. The Germans of Povolzhia did not return to Povolzhia. This was the second nation, the second ethnic group that was deported. How should we take it into account? In Ukraine, unfortunately, we cannot create the results of Crimean Tatar Crimea because the motherland of Crimean Tatars is Crimea, but not mainland of Crimea. It's like developing Jewish culture in Ukraine without understanding that Israel is the center of Jewish nation. We can help Crimean Tatars preserve their cultural interests, political interests on the territory of the mainland of Ukraine, but at the same time we need to put effort so that they can stay in Crimea because that is their motherland. And that should become a big part of our efforts because even if annexation continues of Crimean territory, the issue of the future of Crimean Tatars could be considered as an additional pressure on Russia. Could that become an important document for international audience? This, yes, it can, but it cannot be united to the issue of return of Crimea. This should be two different aspects. Till we are talking about the necessity of return of Crimea to Ukraine, it might happen so that one day there will be not a single Crimean Tatar. Russia will be continuing their campaign, squeezing out Crimean Tatars parallel to our, and we need to stop this Russian campaign at the first stage. How? By international pressure. So the main message for international audience should be preservation of the national center of Crimean Tatar people on their territory. Russia acts similarly always. So the main message should be the issue of violating the human rights, the squeezing out according to the ethnic characteristic. There are human rights, but the right of national minorities and indigenous people is special and very specific part of international law, and we're not using it when we think about Crimea. That is what Crimean Tatars are doing, but I believe that the state of Ukraine should be doing it. What instruments should it use? Ukrainian state did not think about that since 1991. We were saying that the Crimean autonomy as part of Ukraine when Crimean Tatar component was mentioned. In order to preserve traditions, we were always in minority. All the legal foundations of Crimean autonomy were related to Crimean Tatar people. You can see that in the document. That was a decree and there was a referendum. And we need to go back to documents. Can we now, when the peninsula is under annexation, is annexed by Russia, can we create some conditions for Crimean Tatars for their reintegration? We cannot turn the time back, but can we turn the situation towards restoring their rights, and what instruments can Ukraine use? One of the instruments is United Nations, so that there is a representation of Crimean Tatars at the United Nations. Is that an efficient element of the information campaign? For that, we need to apply certain instruments. Our Arab friends have created the whole organization of liberation of Palestine, which did not exist till 1967. Palestine was under the control of Egypt and Jordan. No one knew about the existence of Palestinians. When they needed instruments of pressure on Israel, they invested money. Then it became the national representatives of Palestinian nation, and Crimean Tatar nation do exist.
A question to you, Pavel. What are the messages for the international community, taking into account what your colleague said, and what about this issue at the international level? And some people may believe that we are arguing here, but we are not arguing. If you don't like my example, it doesn't mean that my logic is incorrect. And Vitaliy may argue about the comparison between Sudets and Crimea. But if instrumentally it doesn't work in some situation, we can remember other examples. That after 1945 there were 7 annexations and attempted annexation, and we can draw some lines in the maps, and if some parts of the country are ready for independence, but this is impossible. But we can't remove the existing borders, and Kosovo was not digital Albania, but people, if we compare Kosovo and Crimea, they compare it in Moscow, but it doesn't work because Kosovo can be compared with Abkhazia and Ossetia, but Crimea is an example that doesn't have comparisons from, and Crimea is Crimea happened in the European part, and if not so that, so we may look and find other examples in history that would resonate in the hearts of European journalists in order for them to understand the scope of the problem and to spread this information among their audience. and what is happening among us at this table. There are no tables, actually, but we are sitting here. And I would like to tell you that there are two views at this problem. One is in binocular and the reverse binocular. So both methods are good, but when we look at binocular, we and the Crimeans who left and live in Kiev, they look at binocular at Crimea, and we argue about dates and some different issues. Vitaliy look at reverse binocular, and he goes along generalization lines and looks through global context of the events. And our views do not contradict, and these are interrelated components, and in some situations we can go at the level of details, and in other we can go up to generalizations, and this does not contradict. And the water is liquid, and if we are speaking about our discussion, we always add something to the speech of one another. And in the framework of international platforms, we should convince to the whole world that the story that happened, and we know that Crimea is a bomb in the sphere of international law, and so the borders were violated here, and we know that in some instances there are some territories that entered in different states, and there is a status quo that the borders are permanent, they shouldn't be removed, and international communities saw that these borders, they should not be violated, and there are some cases, for example, when some cities belong to different countries, and the international community should observe the law. And for example, some situations in Karabakh and some issues between Pakistan and India, there are frozen conflicts, and there are some analogies, and we should say these truisms in order them to stay in the heads of people. International community do not recognize the annexation of Crimea, and there are no plans how to return Crimea and how it will happen. And how can we return Crimea to the agenda of international organizations, for example, to the agenda of the USA and other nations, and where these hot areas, how to introduce the issue of Crimea at the level of international discourse? And I don't have a ready answer for this. And and for example, I can't say it now because I don't have a recipe for this. It would be much simpler if we had this recipe, because we live without these recipes and we move ahead. And I understand that today I'm going to Warsaw, and I will try to deliver the ideas we discuss here. And if I had some media access to the audience and some power, and of course, if my colleagues have this recipe to solve this problem, maybe my colleagues could share these ideas with us. I give the floor to my colleague, and I would like to invite you to the Historic Museum at 5 p.m. today. We will compare some historic events. I have my own position as to comparison between Crimea and Sudets, but I would like to state one thing. if we are going to make some comparisons and analogies, we will go against current trends of the media. We should prove that Crimea is a unique example that is really exemplary, and that is that poses the threat to the Europe because after Sudets, the history was different. In that Czechoslovakia was there were problems with different nations then, and conflicts between different nations. And here the history is unprecedented. And I would advise to all of us not to speak about the Turkish examples, because in information sphere it squeezes Ukraine out of the position of the main enemy of Russia in the Russian media space. But Turkish government is much like and can be compared with Russian power. And these we should speak about uniqueness of the situation. Ukraine shouldn't ask for things. It was promised that in spring there will be a strategy how to return Crimea back. And I believe that it's not the whole document can be presented to the media, because some steps should be kept as a state secret. But I don't have a vision how Ukraine can realize Geneva Plus and how to force Russia to come to the negotiation table. And Sergei Lavrov, Medvedev, and Putin, and everyone who can, I won't speak about the proxies. They say that the issue of Crimea is closed forever. To defend Benesh, I will tell you that he didn't establish the borders. These were the borders between Austrian Empire and the Reich. He is not to blame. And as to the target audience and some instruments, we should speak for everyone, and we should choose the instruments to target audience. And we should convince only those who can be convinced. We should fight for the audience who are lost in this media orientation. And about my activity, we fight against Russian myths that Crimea is Russian land, and this work is at its starting point only, and this is not a panacea. And as Pavel, I also don't have a universal approach. They spoke about something with Polish, and this would be of importance. But if we work in this sphere where we can each make some steps, so we can maybe identify the audience on which we can influence. Someone will speak about the violations of the rules of human rights, and maybe even a genocide of Crimean Tatars. So each should work in his or her sphere. This is not a panacea, but we should try. We have one more guest here, and maybe I would like to say several words. First, what we should do. Some things are being done, and 2 years ago and last year we started a complex work in the information sphere. we should not only accelerate the race, and there are work conducted by independent media, journalists, state governmental bodies, and at international level, and also in the territories of Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts. So we should accelerate the pace, and we should also take part in the tele marathon that will be held, and we should gather mass media representatives and to inform the public on the situation. And about the percentage of support in Crimea, it is not really important. The percentage is not important. The matter is, I'm as a researcher and my expert organization, we studied for a long time the issues of Crimea. And Crimea, starting from 2000 to this time, the level of Euro integration increased from 5 to 30%. The level of support and loyalty to Ukrainian state grew from 20% to more than 46%. And in 2012, there was a shock when it was published that the number of people who want to live in Ukraine exceeds the number of people who want to live in Russia. So these are changes in society. The situation changes, and when the Crimea returns, there won't be any problem whether it is loyal. The time will show that time and work will yield results. And as to the strategy, I always will tell you about practical things. But we should understand the strategy. We carry out some work and it will yield some results. And I believe that we will win. But I believe that, and this is very emotional for me and painful, we will win when 10,000 Crimean graduates will get education in Ukraine or abroad. When we create conditions, and Crimean graduates, so those boys and girls who were born in independent Ukraine and Crimea, that they will be able to get education not in Russian educational institutions, but in Ukrainian, Polish institutions. And this is the elite that will create the future of Crimea. And I believe this is the most important issue that should be raised today. So, Eider Muzhdabayev joined us in our discussion. We spoke about some historic parallels and what we should do. And what should be information policy regarding Crimea? What are the problems and what is done and is it enough? I'm sorry for being late. I was in some commemoration events, and here I know you spoke about strategy and in what spheres we should deal with Crimean problems. And this is an important discussion, but I would like to tell you about one important thing that is important for everyone. I will continue the thought of Sergiy Rapenko. I believe that we should remember about the genocide against Tatar people, all those people who are present here and who listen to us. So the European community and international organizations, they recognize that there is some sort of genocide, and it is evident, it is a fact. The Russian Federation now is involved in some processes against Crimean Tatars. The goal is that they want to prevent some activities of Crimean Tatars, and people, that people, they don't want to get into troubles. you should understand the level of fear there, and then maybe they will tell that Mejlis is a terrorist organization, and they want to harden the sentences for Chigis and other people. And there are forecasts that these repressions, they are directed to fully destroy the information space and to destroy any voice on Crimean Tatars in the information space. And then they also will introduce the articles on the sentences for extremism, and every Crimean Tatar know the members of Mejlis.
They see them, they talk to them, they call on the phone, and he's extremist. And that means that all the Crimean Tatars become targets. What will they do? Will they start partial deportation, forced deportation, mass shootings? We don't need to think about that, because all the previous genocides, including genocide of Crimean Tatars, make us think about genocide before it starts. Seeing the symptoms, we all see the symptoms. That's creation of the system when they will be able to do that, starting from common people to leaders. That is done. They are copying the totalitarian regimes of the last century, previous century. They were first liquidating the leaders of organization, then on and on and on. Stalin regime did differently. They did not issue racial laws, and this will never happen in Russia. There will be no law that Crimean Tatars are outside of the law, outcasts. They will do it all quietly. That's hybrid war. But we need to understand, we cannot say that there is no law to oppress Crimean Tatars, and there will be no law like that. This is sort of a Stalinist policy. Hitler was awful, but it at least was expressing his intentions openly, and Russian authorities never expressed their intentions openly. I don't want to hear that once there's no formal oppression of Crimean Tatars, if it is not stated, this shouldn't be mentioned. This is the fact, this happens, and I just called you upon supporting Crimean Tatars. What should the state of Ukraine do to protect Crimean Tatars who are in Crimea? I have a very simple idea. As just like I described the situation in Crimea, we will not hear the voice because this is related to the risk to life of families. Ukraine, the public figures, journalists, the government, the president should become the voice of Crimean Tatars. I was saying that when I addressed the bureaucrats or the different people, and publicly I'm saying I request the president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, to become the voice of Crimean Tatars. He was saying that he is Crimean Tatar when he was speaking at the U.S. Congress. I request Petro Poroshenko to become the voice of Crimean Tatars who are not allowed to express that in hybrid ghetto when they are surrounded by threats to their relatives. I request Ukrainian journalists to become the voice of Crimean Tatar nation. I request each one of you, I request the leaders of all parliamentary and non-parliamentary parties to react to reactions against oppressions against Tatars and other citizens of Ukraine who raised their voice in Crimea against the violence. We have not heard the voice of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the voice of authorities, and we have not heard the voice of politicians and opposition parties of any factions. I do not understand why they were silent. Maybe they thought that this is not important, that secondary question related to corruption, to the resignation of the government. But I believe that is all same thing. And now with this humanitarian situation with Crimean Tatars, the life will force us to think about that. it will be the constanta, and we may also talk about future plans, economic sanctions, but the main thing should be, the foundation should be, and I believe that all Ukrainians will support us, we should talk about the rescue of Crimean Tatar nation. The topic of this forum, it's the topic is annexed peninsula between the past and the future. We were talking about the past, but I would like to hear about the future, because we have short-term challenges about which Eider is talking, and that is the work of international mission on human rights in Crimea. We need to force creation of such mission. That is the problem of oppressions of Crimean Tatars. In the end of the forum, I would like each one of you to express within 1 minute to say what should the state do in short-term and long-term perspective to address, to resolve the problem of Crimea, especially when we are talking about information policy. Then I will repeat what I said, that in short term, the state should pay as much attention as possible to education, historic education. In long term, let's be open. We need to keep it up till the disintegration of Russia. In short term and long term, Ukraine should be looking for the ways how to remind to the world that Crimea is the unique case of annexation, and to attract international community towards fighting for Crimea. I believe that what Eider was talking about, it has become the emotional confirmation of what I believe. I'm sure that from the tactical point of view, which is always more important than strategical. Strategically, we understand we need to fight for restoring territorial integrity of the country, but from the point of view of tactics, we need to defend Crimean Tatar people on their historic motherland. The government of Great Britain in the past issued the Baltic Declaration, which recognized that the Jewish people have the right to have the refuge in Palestine, but it has become the impetus towards further implementation of it into life. So Ukrainian state, Ukrainian politicians are to go above what they believe to be national interests, and they have to make such a document. That would be the first step to creation of the real European state, to understanding that European interests are not the local interests. This will then show how Ukraine differs from Russia, but we need to work on these documents. And on what Crimea will be in the future, well, again, Danzig is also the territory where all the population was deported from. We need to understand whether we want to get the territory with the population back or without the population back, and that means two different policies. But in the 21st century, no one will be returning the territory without population. We will have to return the territory together with the population, which is their understanding all their differences. Every other opinion sounds taking into account the previous one. We are putting not slash but plus sign between each one. I would like to mention the following. Sergiy wrote about that. 23 years passed since 1996 and 2014. More than one generation grew up in Crimea. People who believe that Ukrainian flag is their flag, they were taught in school according to Ukrainian curricula, and they have to continue their education in the universities for the last year and a half. Moscow gives privileges to people from Crimea so that they enter Russian universities. I would like every Crimean student to be able to continue education in Ukrainian universities so that they can get the diploma of Ukrainian diploma, so that they can get integrated into Ukrainian society. I understand that the problem of Crimea was open in 2014, and the fight for the future, the fight for the brains and hearts of those people who want the diploma to be not just like a picture on the wall, so that it's confirmation of their knowledge, so that they can become the part of Ukrainian system. It is important. Today, tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, this is the fight for Crimean student. For me, it's a big honor today to serve Ukrainian people as the civil servant. It's a big honor to represent my compatriots from Crimea. I will be talking about specific things this year. The National Council on TV and Radio Broadcasting, the Ministry of the Information Policy. Our task is to develop broadcasting in the south of Kherson region on the territory of Autonomous Republic of Crimea. We're working on that. And this year, the results will be even greater. We had some results last year when there were no instruments of influence, but thanks to public position, thanks to when there is a desire to achieve the result, we created the radio which people can hear in Crimea and in Donbass. I can tell you that there will be some results. I will not promise. We announced it all, and our task is to do it. There should be 5 radio stations that will be broadcasting in Crimea. We will start the Crimean branch of a national committee. And the state has to create conditions for a development of independent mass media, but what the content should be discussed by journalists. We need to organize the process. When you agree, how do we communicate to people in Crimea? What do we talk at the international level? This is to be decided by the society. It's not the state that has to create some propaganda content that doesn't work. Independent journalists, NGOs. On the 4th of March, I go to Kramatorsk and will be developing the strategy to go together with experts as to broadcasting in Donbass. And the same thing should be happening there in Crimea. This brochure, sometimes we do not need the grants. We just need to get together to talk and to set some tasks. Let's do that. And one more thing. Using this opportunity, I address all Ukrainian journalists. This product was made by Crimean IDPs. We spent half a year, but we've done that. And I thank the Ministry of Information Policy of Ukraine, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine for support, Krim Reale, Ukrainian Institute of National Memory, Criminfor, Detector Media. Thank you for your support. You will find this brochure there. Please write, please report about Crimea. But here's the roadmap. It doesn't tell you what to write about, but it requests you to avoid myths created by propaganda, talking about civil society. This brochure is on civil society. There was Sergiy's initiative to create it. We created it, and one of Crimean IDPs printed it, published it. It was a couple of days ago. He called us and he said, in Kiev, do you need any assistance? We say, yes, we need. He said, okay, I will publish, I will print it out. We say, Sergiy Bazhenko, thank you. I don't know whether you hear or not, but this is a story about how you look at these people and you understand. That's super. everyone should be doing what they can. Talking about information policy, that's the element of information policy. Use it. This will be the contribution to adequately cover all issues about Crimea. I hope that we will find enough efforts, but no one, well, 10 political prisoners starting from Sentsov down to Gelminji. Maybe some people know more names. We need to know about that and to disseminate that information. But there should be more events like that this year with practical results. I said already, I request the president and the government and the MPs and politicians to become the voice of Crimean Tatars. It's an important moral category, but as to very specific things, I would like to report to the whole country that a year ago, on the 1st of April 2015, ATR TV channel broadcasting was prohibited in Crimea. After that, ATR left Crimea and went to Kiev. Then, if you remember, and that's the TV channel that showed everything we are talking about. The whole world was watching it. Then we had the action, don't kill ATR. It did not succeed. ATR was killed in Crimea, but it was restored here. Less than a year passed, and the president of Ukraine promised that this is the matter of honor for Ukraine, so that the Crimean Tatar TV company should broadcast in Ukraine and in Crimea. A year later, a few days ago, we launched here the campaign Save ATR, because nothing materially, the only in the world, the Crimean Tatar TV company and radio of Crimean Tatars have not received anything from the state of Ukraine, because ATR itself pays for broadcasting, not the state of Ukraine. Radio Maidan has not been restored to broadcast to Crimea. I don't want to blame anyone. I would like to inform all the Ukrainian society, the mass media, that closing ATR channel in Ukraine because of financial reasons, that's the nearest reality. I believe this will be the shame for the state of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, Eider. Quite a pessimistic end. I hope that the conclusions will be made and the ATR will continue its existence. We have 10 minutes left. You will not be able to ask all questions you want, but we have 10 minutes more.
Good afternoon. Bagutskaya Elizaveta. I'm an IDP from Crimea, an activist. IDP from Crimea. I have a comment about how we can attract international institutions to the solving of Crimea problems. How can we attract international institutions to this Crimean problem? And in this context, I'm glad that this topic was raised by my colleague, and official Ukraine should take responsibility to solve these issues, and without it, it is impossible to attract international organizations. And Ukrainian authority, they place their problems on the shoulders of international organizations regarding Crimea, and also problems with the international debts. And our president, he said that he is a Crimean Tatar. this should be his real opinion, his real view. And our government should pay more attention to Crimean problems. And this problem should be more important than to stay in their positions, or it should be more important than the issue of privatization. And as to information strategy, I should say the following. The occupation is less dependent on information policy of our state, but it is more influenced by the Russian Federation and their president. And we know that he simplified his task, and they should just just carry out some telephone polls, and he can solve the problem by this anytime he wants, if he really wants this. But the occupation will be successful only if Russia loses its territory. And the key is solving the issue of Crimea. The information policy should be carried out when the occupation happens, and I agree with Vitaliy Portnykov that for the occupation we solve problems of indigenous people of Crimea, and their interest should be in our constitution, and this should be a precedent for everyone, that this should be in our constitution, and this information policy should give the opportunity to those Crimean Tatars to integrate the community that is built here in Ukraine. Thank you. Natalia Belitzer, the Institute of Democracy, named after Philip Orlik. Several short remarks as to information policy. It's pleasant to hear that you have plans to enforce it in the Kherson Oblast. I returned from there, and I can say that there's no counteraction that is clearly focused on anti-Islamist propaganda. There's no such a counteraction. And oppositional forces work against the processes, the Party of Regions, and also Antifas with clear messages. They copy Russian chauvinist sites, and they try to include some right forces representatives, and that counteract this propaganda. And everyone wrote that a grenade was thrown to the building of Mejlis in Kherson, but no one noted that this happened not only in Mejlis, but to the basement where the radio station Kuresh was situated. So this is a information resource that counters the propaganda, and they were deprived of this building because there are some repair works, and now they are in a very uncomfortable building. So the Khersonshina territory is very important for the whole spectrum connected with information policy. Next, it was said that that we should forecast how to restore the rights of indigenous people, Crimean Tatars, in the on the peninsula. But this is a perspective on which we should work, But this is a not short-term perspective, but let's remind about short-term perspective and the map of Crimean state that existed before. We can work on the models, the role of Crimea, its position in the structure of Ukrainian state, in more traditional territory for Crimean Tatars. And this will be a real step in the development of working strategy. And the last thing, I ask all the journalists who write about this issue and to the experts, please, you shouldn't use the terminology like peoples of Crimea, especially deported peoples. There were no deported German, Bulgarian, Armenian people. There's only 3 indigenous peoples in Crimea, and others are minorities, as well as there's no Crimean people. It's not a terminology. This is a very serious legal and political consequences of this. That's why you should observe correct terminology speaking about these issues. Name 3 people: Crimean Tatars, Krimchaki, and Karims. So these are 3 indigenous peoples of the Crimea, and they are the only entities that have collective rights and have the right for their self-identification. No other community have the right like this. So maybe you should speak, and you should speak clearly, and that cameraman should see you. Pavel Zhinirenko, question to Mr. Kostynskyi. At President's side, there are 3 petitions. People address the President in order to prohibit inter-channel or to deprive them from the license. Every should work in his own field, and why the people should address to people, why the president should deal with it, if there are a body who is responsible for this. So this station is the station of the enemy. The war is going on. So some functions should be provided by the state, and you remember that Maidan is not about writing something on Facebook and to go to work and to write. And we should be involved in the struggle. Our community, civil society should be involved. It is a driver of changes in our society. And the power is the executive body. And as to Inter, we should negotiate things. So you want people to watch, or you want, for example, if people want to watch some channel, they should watch it. People, we want that the Council of Radio and TV Broadcast, it should observe the licenses, and it's not about the viewers, it's about the law. We carry out our functions. It is licensing and adherence to the law in the sphere of broadcasting. If there are some violations, so it should be stopped. By the political will should be realized. Millions of people, if they stop to watch some
the channel which, according to Russian citizens, is the agent of the country aggressor. Vitaliy Martinyuk, Ukrainian Independent Center for Political Research. A brief comment on the question as to liberation of Donbass. We have anti-terrorist operation. This is a certain format It's more or less specific. At the international level, we have Normandy group, and we have three trilateral contact group. There are certain formats. Talking about liberation of Crimea, we have no format, no international, even though Geneva Plus was declared, no Ukrainian. Do we need such a format? Something specific that would coordinate all the efforts. Thank you for your question. I do have a version of such a format. The only legitimate organization of Crimea, which is in Ukraine, is the Majlis of Crimean Tatar nation that says this is elected parliament of Crimean Tatars. So my opinion is Ukrainian society, politicians, public figures, on the basis of Majlis could get united as Majlis Plus, as I call it, and in this format could discuss all the problems of Crimea connected to Crimean Tatars, not to Crimean Tatars, to education, because there's no other legitimate structure from Crimea. I believe that could be a very good version of going to politics, to form new authorities, to prepare the authorities. Why don't you like the format that I suggested, like Organization of Liberation of Palestine? Organization of Liberation of Palestine was confederation of different organizations of even religious and national level, but they act independent of Arab states. Arab states have never been responsible for them, and the Organization of Liberation of Crimea could also act independently. Are you talking about the return of Israel? No. I thought it's like going back. No. I mean, that is basically the lobby discussion. We have used all our time. We were discussing the issue of information policy of Ukraine, on Crimea for 2 hours, and our experts continue to discuss it. The audience continues to ask questions. The continuation of our International Forum, Crimea is Ukraine, an next peninsula between the past and the future, will start at 1. For half an hour, you can continue discussing very important issues. Thank you for attention. Let's see each other at 1. Thank you.
Можете проходить. Новый историчный факт. Я сейчас смотрю.